On March 14th, 1980, Lot Flight 7 from JFK International was flying here to Warsaw when it crashed, killing all passengers on board. For today's episode of Kult America, we're visiting the crash site 36 years later. So the plane was badly delayed in New York City due to a snowstorm, but other than that, the passengers enjoyed a 9-hour, completely uneventful flight. As the airplane was approaching Warsaw's International Airport, the pilots noticed an error that indicated the landing gear might not be down. Now, on these old Soviet planes, that was actually a frequent error, and you never knew whether the landing gear was actually not down or if the light was broken. To be on the safe side, they requested a go-around. And when the pilots increased the thrust, an explosion occurred, destroying 3 of the 4 engines. Somewhere in the proximity behind me, the airplane entered a 26-second nosedive, crashing into this medieval moat beside me. Now, the moat at the time was frozen because it was late winter, and there is a theory that many of the passengers may have survived the flight if they did not drown in this murky, horrible water. I don't believe that, because when you look at the photos, it's so destroyed and there's just rubble everywhere that I don't believe there's a way that any of the passengers could have survived, and many of the bodies were unidentifiable. Trying to imagine how everything came together here. As far as I can tell, the airplane crashed approximately in the middle of this fort, so it was probably the tail was probably laying around where these largest trees are. The parking lot was not there at the time, and this entire area around me was a debris field, so it was disastrous. I think the tail of the plane was discovered in this approximate area right here. I think the parking is built up a little bit. It was a lot different at the time. This is a really nice monument for the pilot of the aircraft, and actually they didn't stop with the monument. They named this entire street after him, and fittingly the street essentially ends at the beginning of the International Airport. Captain Lipovica is said to be a Polish aviation hero because as the plane entered its descent, he apparently managed to maneuver the plane into this moat, avoiding the juvenile detention center behind me. The catastrophe would have been much worse had the plane crashed here on account of it killing many, many minors who were incarcerated at the time. I also want to point out, and I'm not sure if it's coming across with the audio, that it is very, very eerie to stand here today because you can hear clearly airplanes taking off less than a kilometer from where I'm standing now. And it just makes you think about how close those people were to arriving home safe to their loved ones. The body of the captain was found about 100 meters from the airplane. To give a little bit of perspective, those yellow trees are the approximate area where the tail of the airplane was, and the captain's body was found next to this fence here. There's a memorial today. Other passengers' bodies were scattered around this entire area, and many of those who could be identified were obviously put into their own graves, but unidentified body parts went into a communal grave, which is still visited by families today. Among the 87 fatalities were the now legendary singer Anya Jantat, who is buried in a historic Warsaw cemetery. It's actually the same cemetery where most of Chopin's family is also buried. There was a famous American cultural expert, Alan P. Merriman, 6 Polish students returning home from a conference in New York. Now, the flight crew has been buried together in a Warsaw military cemetery. Pretty crazy how young these people were and how many of them were actually women. Like here you have Alicja, Grażyna, Joanna, Elizabeta, Alicja, and also they weren't only stewardesses. For example, here you have a navigator. Not far from them is the flight crew of Lot Flight 5055, which crashed in a very similar fashion years later. I actually made a video about this flight crash as well. You can see it by clicking the card. I always kind of come to the same conclusion when I visit a place where a terrible tragedy happened, and that is that it's just not cinematic at all. You know, the wall where the tail of the plane was is just a wall, and the moat is just a moat. But there is one cinematic thing about this entire story, and that is the flight engineer. He was scheduled to be on this flight, but opted to swap with a colleague because he was suffering extreme jet lag and exhaustion. Now that saved his life, in fact, but it only saved his life for another 7 years because that same engineer perished on a very similar flight which crashed on the other side of this airport. I mentioned it earlier in this video, flight 5055, and yeah, it almost makes you think that fate had something to say.